Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined today by a gentleman called John Howard, a property developer, investor, mentor, author, TV commentator and heaven knows what else.
Stephen, it's great to be here, and thank you for all those mentions there. All true, all true.
Good to have you here, John.
Thank you.
It really is. Long time since I've seen you in our studio, but welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking today about the state of the property market across the country since the budget that we had in late September. Now, John, there was a lot of expectation, a lot of worry, a lot of concern about what might come into this budget, and actually a bit of a damp squib really, wasn't it? I think.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. You're glad I'm back, aren't you?
I am indeed.
Not sure I actually agree with that completely, because I think what happened was they took too long to have the budget. They announced it too soon. They announced what it was going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. That's really held up. You know, we've got a number of estate agencies, for instance, and certainly it affected the sales. People were very cautious, didn't know what was going to come. They're very worried. They already announced, for pensioners, the heating allowance going. So they're very concerned. I would agree with you, when it happened, it could have been worse. The budget could have been worse, end of October, whatever it was. However, most commentators, and I'm talking about The Guardian, The Independent, we know what the Daily Mail are going to say, but most commentators who are not politically biased, because we all are to a point, I accept that, and obviously I'm involved with the Conservative Party, but we still wanted, even though I am biased, if you like, I still wanted a positive budget, because it's important for society, it's important for the nation as a whole that things do improve, and I don't think the Tories did a pretty poor job at the end as well, and unfortunately, virtually everyone thinks the same about this budget, which is that it's negative. It's going to cause, massive problems in terms of growth, unemployment. The idea is it's meant to be a budget for growth, but I mean, at the end of the day, virtually every commentator I know, and not particularly Tory-based or biased, are saying, well, if there is any, it's going to be 3 years away. And what do you do in the meantime? In the meantime, they'll probably come back for another bite next year.
You can bet on it, I think.
Well, I think we can bet on it, yes. I agree.
John, one of the reasons that we're going to do this over two programmes rather than one is because one of the pet criticisms I have of people's questions on our programmes is they talk about the property market. Well, what do you mean, the property market?
It's
do you mean
huge.
Residential,
Exactly.
commercial, affordable, whatever? It's so complex.
Very complex.
And the one worry that I have is governments don't seem to be able to put it all together and take a global view of the property market. And I worry that the information that they draw in making these decisions isn't really comprehensive enough. And it's not at the ground level where the real figures matter. I mean, let me give you a quick example. I have a lot of agents in the studio who've been telling me all year, oh, it's very busy.
Well, they would, wouldn't they?
Really?
Because every time they pull the bedroom curtains open in the morning, it's a sunny day with them.
Of course.
And I employ none, Rob, so I know. But we all know the truth is that, one, it's a micro market, so every area is different. That's the first thing. And secondly, it's pretty tough out there.
It sure is. And I think it's tougher than people are letting on at the moment.
I agree.
So I think the government have got to be very careful with, not very polite term, but I'm going to say government interference in the market. And I don't mean that in a rude way. I just mean, I think they've got to be very careful how they interject into the mechanics of the market. So, John, first of all, let's look at this rather ambitious 1.5 million homes target for being built within this parliament. I have people in the studio that tell me that we just don't have the materials to build that many homes. We don't have the labour to build that many homes. Well, what's your view?
Well, my view is we need to build 500,000 houses a year, not 300,000. It's nowhere near enough. I think the stats are that if they build up to the target, that works out another 9 houses per 1,000 people who want to buy. So it's not very impressive. Now, I do appreciate also that if you miss the target the first year, and this year we're going to build less than 200,000 houses, then next year, my maths isn't great, but next year you've got to build even more than 300,000 a year. And if you miss that target, you've got to build even more the following year and following year. So,
John, let me just interrupt you there. You did mention something. You said 9 for every 1,000 that want to buy. There's also another factor in that. How many can afford to buy? Well, never mind want.
Well, I think we might be misleading people listening to this show.
Okay.
Because what you've got to remember is we have a socialist government. They're not too bothered about house owners. What they're worried about is the social houses. So when they say they want to build 300,000, 1.5 million in the Parliament term of the term, they're talking about social houses. I don't think they're particularly talking about homes that private people want to live in, private homes that people want to live in. And I think that's something else that people don't quite appreciate.
Right. But I mean, even when we look at this, if we're starting now to decide between how many private homes need to be built, how many social homes need to be built, how many affordable homes need to be built, there's various sectors.
Well, they say there's 1.3 million people who need a home to live in the UK. 1.3 million people need a home to live in. Well,
so we'll have it all cleared up in 4.5 years then?
Well, there you go.
Simple as
but
that.
What we do know is that we still have more and more people coming to the country. Now you may need 30,000 bricklayers, by the way, to come into the country in order to help build these houses, and electricians and plumbers and everything else. So that how are you going to do that? Especially if you're going to start rebuilding places like Ukraine, because all the building materials are going to be used up. So, and remember, in this country, 70% of all building materials come from Europe.
Yeah.
So
I've been preaching this one for more than a year now. The rebuilding that's required in Ukraine, in Gaza,
huge, isn't it?
John, you're somebody that develops all over the country, from south to Scotland. Are you finding this shortage of labour and materials a problem nationwide, or is it focused in certain areas? Is it just London? Is it?
I would say on our smaller developments, we don't really see any real problem apart from the cost. I mean, build costs are still going up. Materials are still going up. Labour, of course, I mean, with this budget alone, don't forget minimum wage going up, national insurance for employers going up. All that's going to do is increase, well, I think it's going to increase inflation, which of course they need to keep at a certain level in order for interest rates not to rise. So I think all that is a really, really big challenge for them. And where we're doing at the moment, we're recladding 215 flats, and the funding is coming from the Levelling Up Fund.
Sure.
And cladding is a massive challenge because they've now said they want to get all these blocks finished within the next 4 years, and that's a huge challenge. Mainly, one of the reasons it's such a big challenge is because there's so many blocks to do still, and the materials. When you start talking about recladding 215 flats it's that in itself is a huge amount of materials required, and if you times that by goodness knows how many blocks there are still to do, then I think that's where the materials really start to be a problem on these bigger sites.
Okay, and I see in the press that we're getting continued complaints about the length of time that's taking, and the government has stepped in to say that they want this doing within a certain time frame now. Great. Who is dragging their feet? Is it the cost of this being borne by developers and freeholders? Or?
Well, I mean, we've purchased the freehold of this block in order to rescue it in a way, and we also have got another tower as part of it which is empty, which we're then going to develop ourselves, another 80 flats. But at the end of the day, it takes, what people must appreciate is you need planning permission. You need to go all through the new regulations.
You need planning to do the recladding?
Yeah, because if it's a different material, if it's a different colour, if you're in a conservation area,
sure.
we have just appointed the consultants, which it takes 4 months to appoint the consultants. It'll probably take another 5 months to get the schedule out of works, then the tender documents out. While that's happening, you need permission not only off the local authority now, but there's a new government quango that you need to go to, which at the moment they've got a 4-month backlog on. So, before to get the design checked and everything else. So, I mean, you're talking from you say, I want to get on and do it, to the day you physically start, is probably a year and a half. And probably another year and a half to do it. So unless they're starting now, the process, it's highly unlikely that these blocks will be finished in 4 years' time.
Okay. Well, the attention, it sounds as if the attention being given to this retrospective work is necessary and is obviously being carried out, and that's part of the delay,
Yes.
which can't really be held.
No.
Is the same standard of scrutiny being applied to new building?
It is now, yes. So architects now, under the new rules, have now got to sign off the building at the end, which they never had to do before.
Right.
So they have to sign off the design and that it's built to their design and everything else, which is a new requirement, along with the new building regulations that came out again in April this year. And no doubt there'll be some new ones next April. And every time these new regs come out, it gets more expensive to do the job, which is, safety is incredibly important. No one is saying that, especially with these high-rise blocks. Of course it is. But it is very, very challenging. And I would say for the smaller developer who is employing a contractor to do the work on any of these small sites, house building sites of, say, 5 to 15, 20 or 30, it's very hard to make any money. Because the cost of the build costs are so high, the time it takes, because even when you have planning permission, the preconditions that you have to go through in order to get a start date could be anything up to a year with the local authority. And that's and you've got interest running all the way through this period of time.
Is this a similar situation nationwide?
Across the country.
Right.
Across the country.
Okay. I mean, coming back to the cladding and the safety now of buildings, I know one of the problems that we've had here, particularly in London, and especially in this area of London where there are a lot of high-rise buildings, was that it didn't seem to be the resistance to get the work done, thank heavens. That goes towards saving any more disasters.
Yes.
But the difficulty was that you couldn't get your safety certificate until the last flat in the block had been completed in terms of safety work, which might be a 2 or even 3 year project. So those people were locked in for 3 years, unable to sell their apartments because no safety certificate.
Absolutely. But what happened in the past, and certainly what happened on the block that we're involved in Ipswich, where the local authority gave permission, gave a completion certificate on each flat, even though the externals of the building weren't finished. So that's even more of a problem. So, and there are, and they never gave a completion certificate on the outside of the building because it never got done to their satisfaction.
Right.
So it's not just one person. It's a whole category of problems rather than just one normally.
Okay.
And Grenfell was the same. And there's a lot of people involved in Grenfell who probably look back now and think they could have done a better job.
Well, looking back is always easy, isn't it?
It is. And criticising is even easier.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now moving on, but still talking about the new government and what they're going to do. I don't want to dwell on this sort of argument, oh, well, we've inherited this, we've inherited that. I think it's a pointless exercise.
Totally. We've got to look forward.
Got to look forward. And this government has got to learn to say, well, it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. Yeah. We've got it now.
We are where we are. Yeah. Let's get on with it.
So when I spoke earlier about defining what the property market is, do you think we're going to get a difference in mix of what's going to be built in the coming years? In other words, a higher preference for social and affordable housing as opposed to private housing? I mean, certainly in London, we've had a wealth of private housing being built. A lot of it sold to overseas investors who might not be quite so keen now with the buy-to-let changes, the extra costs involved, the lack of beneficial tax regimes in that area. So do you think we are going to see a big change?
Well, we said earlier, it's a socialist government. And do they really believe in home ownership? They might believe in you owning one home, hopefully.
Right. Well, we've seen the effect of having two now.
Well, we have seen the effect of having two. I would say there'll be their aim will be to build a lot more social houses rather than private. The private houses, the private market, I think they'll say take care of itself. Their drive will be to build social houses for people to live in. And one thing I would say, and I know I'm cutting across slightly what we're talking about, but there's a lot of people in housing association properties in this country and council house properties who earn a lot of money. Now, the argument surely is they should be buying a property. They shouldn't be in social housing or council houses. Again, that would help.
Yes, I think
that would help.
I think it would.
The 1.3 million people who they need to be housed in them.
The only trouble is you're looking there to control that. You're looking at sort of ever rolling means testing, aren't you?
Well, that's all right, isn't it?
But I actually don't have a difficulty with that. I think based on your tax situation, which is a known quantity to the government, if you're getting government subsidies or local authority subsidies on your rent, then I think at a certain point, I don't say that you should be disturbed and thrown out of your house and told to move elsewhere. I think that would be cruel and unkind. People put down roots. You have children at school. You have all this sort of thing.
They're in there.
But they're in there. But it doesn't mean that their status of being in there can't change, i.e. that they could move on to what could be a commercial realistic
Stephen,
rent.
I hear what you say, but they're taking up a property for, when they moved in there, they probably weren't on a very good wage and they probably weren't doing very well and they had the support of the housing association or the council, which is fantastic. What a country we live in. However, they've now become successful, but they're still living in the same home.
No, I mean, I take your point, but I think it is socially unacceptable to force people to move, especially if they've got family roots. But if they paid a commercial rent to either their housing association or their local authority, then that local authority could leverage that rental income. But anyway, we'll move on from that. John, one of the other things I want to talk about is our structure of social housing. We've gone through a time when councils have not been able to retain the money for any properties sold. They've had to pass that back to government. Yes. We've had over this last, I'm going to say 25 years, the introduction of housing associations into the chain. Yes. So we have local authority who have a need to house people, who've then been dictating to housing associations who they may or may not take as tenants. Housing associations, some acting a little bit more commercially than others, shall we politely say, across the country. I wonder if our structure of getting this social housing right is too complex, too difficult. Would it not be great to go back to councils building their own council housings?
Stephen, you and me would like to go back to the 1980s and 1990s when you can make proper money out of buying and selling property. It's a lot harder now. Let me give you the history of what's happened, because I think that's important, going back to see why we're in this situation. So at one point, all the local authorities in the UK were allowed to build council houses.
Right.
And there weren't really any housing associations. What happened under the Margaret Thatcher's government and subsequent Conservative governments is that the local authorities were not allowed to own or build any more council houses. In fact, they were told they had to transfer those houses to a housing association. Right. And that's where we are. Well, that's where we were till about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Then the Conservative government, and who would have thought a Conservative government would do this? Mrs. Thatcher would turn in her grave. They allowed council houses, as councils, to build new council houses and fund them through Homes England. Homes England is the government property bank, huge. I borrowed 20 million off them to do one of my towers in Ipswich a while ago. I'm talking to them about another loan on another tower in Ipswich, which we talked about earlier. So they are now not only allowed to build houses again, they also had a grant. A number of big city authorities have had grants off the Conservative government to buy brand new houses off developers.
Right.
As well. And I benefited from that in Fife in Scotland and in Birmingham, where we're selling houses to Birmingham City Council. And they've just been given another grant, a top-up grant, to carry that on through Labour. They've also been allowed now to keep the receipts from any council house sales. And the council house sales have been reduced in increased in percentage of what they have to pay. Right. At one point, people were only having to pay something like 25% of the actual value to buy their council house because they were sitting tenants and all the rest of it. Now it's a lot more. And of course, they also have to pay it back. But I've got a story which I must just tell you from 2 days ago, when someone said to me, "You can't make it up, John." Someone sold the council house to a tenant years ago for £35,000, and they've just bought the same house back for £242,000.
Right.
So
okay.
What can I say?
Okay. Well, look.
And it wasn't Angela Rayner's house either, by the way.
Right.
That's
okay.
what you're thinking.
Good.
Someone else's.
Good. Okay. But, I think people can just glean from our conversation that there may be need to restructure this business of affordable social and other sorts of social housing, and the way we arrive at it, the way we distribute it, the way we build it, and the way we
Yes, well, one of the criticisms recently has been that although over 1,000 square metres of new builds, it should be 30% should be for social housing. And what's happened is been if you can demonstrate you're not making 20% profit, and of course, genuinely, a lot of developers are able to do that because of build costs, then there is a negotiated settlement.
Okay.
It comes down.
And is that a negotiated cash settlement? Or?
It can be a commuted payment, which is a cash settlement, and that money is used elsewhere. Right. It can also mean that rather than 3 houses, you may only have to build 1 for the councils or the local or the housing association. Sure. But the other issue is that housing association has got to be able to, one, have a need in that area for the house or more than 1 houses or whatever, which you'd think they've all got, but also they've got to be able to fund it. And although it's subsidised from the, so in other words, say a house you're selling for £350 a foot on the open market, you would sell it to the housing association at a discount of say £220 a foot. But if they can't fund that, then they can't buy it. And what's been happening is there's been developments where there's meant to be social housing, but no one can provide what's called a provider, a shelter, a housing association to actually do the damn job.
Through lack of funding? Through
lack of funding. And that's where the Labour Party, I think, are putting in £5 billion in order to stop that happening and in order to be able to, take on these houses.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, sounds to me like we do need to restructure the system a little bit.
I think the one good thing about a new government is that, they come with fresh ideas, and we need fresh ideas. Whether they're going to be the ideas that you and I like, Stephen, is another matter.
Right. Well, luckily it doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis.
You've been there, seen it and done it, Stephen, haven't you?
I have indeed. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to say a big thank you to John Howard for coming in the studio today. John, as I mentioned, this is a 2-part programme. In our next programme, I'm going to be talking to you about the changes that the government are planning to put in terms of planning and the way the process worked, which will include our use of the green belt.
Yes.
And perhaps what we need to build in terms of types of housing and whether that is changing now with time. So again, big thank you, John, for coming in. I look forward to it. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Join me again next time on Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin. Look forward to seeing you then. Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and this is Property TV, and I'd like to welcome our viewers to our new home on Bloomberg Sky Channel 502. Welcome to you all. The UK property market is facing a pivotal moment as we approach the end of 2024, First, inflation continues to hit hard with rising mortgage rates and a reduction in housing stock. Property transactions remain well below pre-pandemic levels. House builders have seen billions wiped off their market value since October's budget, underscoring the challenges ahead. Meanwhile, renters are feeling the squeeze. Demand for rental properties is soaring, particularly in London, where availability is at its lowest since 2021. This shortage, compounded by landlords leaving the market after tax changes, is driving rental costs higher and making affordability an ongoing concern. Recent leaseholder reforms have come under fire. Errors in the rushed legislation of the last government mean critical changes could now be delayed by over a year, leaving many leaseholders in a state of uncertainty. However, there is speculation that announcements in the spring of 2025 may include measures to support landlords and potentially ease the housing crisis by encouraging more investment in the rental sector. Despite increased stamp duty, the UK remains a hotspot for foreign investors. The relative stability of UK property is still attracting international buyers. Alternative property investments are on the rise, with sectors like student housing and assisted living offering high returns, making them increasingly popular with investors. The UK property market is navigating a turbulent landscape marked by inflation, policy shifts, and evolving investment trends. Let's see where we go in 2025. That's your property market update. Thanks for watching. I'll keep you informed with the latest developments in the market next time.